is the Anfield Wrap. I am Neil Atkinson, and across the course of the last couple of weeks on the Anfield Wrap, we have been looking at different aspects of the football club, both now and also looking ahead. We've done some of this behind the paywall. We've done some of this on free shows like the Anfield Wrap. So we've been having a little look at what Liverpool's rivals have been up to in seasons gone by. We've been having a little look at the way the transfer market, we think that'll work going into next year. And then we've been discussing what business Liverpool may or may not need to do. We've had a chat about the women's team. If you name it, we've looked at it apart from one thing, which we were always building up to for this edition of the Anfield Wrap, and that is to have a conversation about Liverpool's ownership, what it's done to date, and what is to come next. And to do that with me, I have got Rob Gutmann, Andy Heaton, John Gibbons, Jay McKenna, and Gareth Roberts in order to have a chat about Fenway Sports Group and in general the way in which it's going. Now, there's rumours, very, very sort of clarified rumours that it looks as though a group called RedBird may well be acquiring 10% of Fenway Sports Group. We'll be talking about that. Within that as well, there's rumours of other sports teams and enterprises that Fenway Sports Group might go for. That may well come up throughout all of this. But I'll start off with John Gibbons and say that it is now 10 and a half years since Fenway acquired Liverpool. It's been quite the journey for everyone. In almost every facet of the pitch, there's been steps forward, there's been steps back, there's been U-turns, there's been success. You know, there's been a European Cup and a Premier League title along the way. It is, what I would say is, John, they've managed to be busy.
You have, yeah. It is funny though, isn't it? Because 10 years is a long time, you know, in anything. Do you know what I mean? And a lot is going to happen. So when you say there's ups and downs, I'd almost say that's inevitable. Do you know what I mean? That any owners coming in, you know, aren't going to get everything right, and whether you know a local Scouse lad done good, if you like, or you know basically a nation state owning us, whichever sort of extreme you want to do, there always would have been, you know, some things that would have put supporters' backs up, especially ours, and so there always would have been things, I think. And so when you sort of analyse the errors that they've made, which, you know, will come up throughout the show, I think it has to be sort of, you know, reasonably caveated with, well, there always sort of would have been something, and there always would have been, you know, kind of incidents where they got the mood wrong or got the, you know, a decision wrong, because that's what making decisions is. Do you know what I mean? And that's what sort of ownership of any sort of organisation is. But as you say, Neil, the most significant thing is the fact that they delivered a league title and they delivered a European Cup, and that league title in particular was missing for a long time. And they came here, said they were coming to win, and it's took a little bit longer maybe than what we'd have liked, / maybe they'd have hoped, but they have done it, and they've delivered the two biggest trophies and a World Club Championship as well. And so that has to be sort of considered whenever analysing their success over the 10 years. But also, we need to recognise as well that success in the past doesn't necessarily mean success in the future. And, you know, they can't, you know, hang the hat on what they've done forever, nor would they probably want to.
If we go back sort of 10 and a half years, Gareth, I mean, you were Edison well read back then, and it strikes me as an interesting sort of little bit of a journey. If you think about the moment where Fenway Sports Group arrived, and even then they weren't even called Fenway Sports Group, they've rebranded in the meantime. But it was done, I think, with sort of three really important bits of information around it. One was they were replacing Hicks and Gillette, who'd very much shown themselves to be a busted flush, but they came from the same country as Hicks and Gillette. And yep. I think that was sort of very, very primary in people's minds. The second was, there was a lot of talk around them like they were always going to be the smartest guys in the room and they were going to work European football out of the drop of a hat. I think that's sort of worth pointing out. And the third thing was that the club was in a really bad state, to be quite honest with you, because of the previous ownership, but even possibly to an extent because of the ownership and the administration. Before that, Liverpool hadn't sort of wrestled with the 90s or with the decade that followed. I hate to call it the noughties, but we are where we are. And that's all of that is what becomes FSG walk into, and how they're conducted and how they're presented and how they allow themselves to be presented from day one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the context of what they walk into is massive for me in that. And you're right to go back further than not just the immediacy of what they walked into, but further back. So, you know, we perhaps stay with Moors for too long. You know, we're not progressive in that sense. We're not progressive in that we don't do anything with the ground. We sit on our hands in terms of that for years and years and years. Meanwhile, you know, clubs like Manchester United disappear off into the distance in terms of revenue, whereas we're still saying, well, I wouldn't want a mega store anyway, lad. you know, and all this kind of stuff. So you know, with hindsight on all that, you know, we could have done with embracing the capitalism a bit sooner, and perhaps we would have won more things. And people don't want to hear that, but here we are. But what they walked into, I just looked this up before. You know, so their first game is a defeat at Goodison Park. And our team is Pepe Reina, Carragher, Skirtle, Kyriakos, Konchesky, Morales, Gerrard, Lucas, Maxi, Joe Cole, Torres. You know, you had a.
I thought that was going to be worse, to be honest.
Well, a couple of good lads in there.
You had an absolute imposter of a manager trying to defend that. You had players on the pitch that day, both on our side, arguing with each other. Clearly didn't like each other. You had groups of fans who didn't like each other, because let's not forget, you know, we all pat ourselves on the back these days about the great job we did getting those owners out, but we fucking hated each other at the time. It was horrible going to match. There was loads of infighting. There was people walking in marches, you know, Jay included, me included, others on the call included, and we were giving people shit because they were in the chippy and things like that. You know what I mean? So it was a mad.
You lazy bastards, get out of the pub. I think
That's
was the
one.
chance.
Yeah, exactly, mate. Yeah, and you know, it was a mad time to be a Liverpool fan, and a mad time, I reckon, to walk into the ownership of a football club. I mean, quite early on, they were probably like, "What is this?" So, you know, to move from the position there to the position we are now, you know, John rightly referenced already the trophies, but there's other stuff that they've done that I think deserves credit in that. You know, it's not like when Moores was in charge, the club was dead open to us. Didn't give a shit about us, didn't talk to us. It was a closed shop. And also as well, when it was Moores, there was plenty of moaning. Like, my thing with ownership debates, and a bit kind of why I find them a little bit grating, is really like, well, what is it you want? Like, is there an owner anywhere that everyone just goes, oh, he's sound, and or she's sound, and we all just don't ever talk about it again? Because I would say no. It's almost the impossible job. Like, whatever they do, someone somewhere isn't happy about it. You know, because they're right at the top of a ladder of a football club that we're all really passionate about. And, you know, you think about, you know, what we do and the debates we have on podcasts, we can't agree half the time. So the idea that, you know, they can satisfy everyone somehow at some point, it's not possible. I also think as well, you know, you referenced there the sort of where they come from and the time they arrive at. I almost think that I intensified the scrutiny that they've had ever since. So, you know, are other football clubs, comparable football clubs, are they really doing a better job than Liverpool? Or do we just scrutinise every single thing to the nth degree? I would say there is some of that going on. Like, I think it's great that we stayed at Anfield. I think it's great that we've got a new main stand. I think they've sat on their hands about the Annie Road and they could have got that done sooner. But equally, I'm glad that we are where we are with the ground now. I'd like to see the Annie Road get done. The Cop's obviously getting dwarfed every time something that gets done, and that probably needs looking at longer term. But I'm glad we stayed where we are, I really am. And like they've been in charge while that's happened. I would also say things like, you know, we reference it a lot on the Anfield Wrap, and rightly so, the community stuff. You can't sort of disassociate them from that. They run the club, and look, they said at the start that they wanted to be visible and they wanted to be involved and they wanted to speak to fans. I don't think I would say there's still room for improvements on that. But equally, there has been improvement. So I'll always point to the fact that Tony Barrett is on the inside of the club now. I think that's a big deal. You know, some people say it isn't, but it is a big deal to have someone who took his position as a journalist all the way along, was fairly upfront that he was a Red. Do you know what I mean? I'm fairly upfront of where his politics were and what he thought about fan involvement, and to go and get him, because we want his knowledge, we want him involved. And there's not that many people at the football club. You know, we think of it, don't we, as this huge thing with the huge following, but the people actually in it, running it, who've got jobs there, don't number that many. And there's a picture, I don't know if it's on the internet or not. I know Tony wasn't that happy about being on it, I think. They did a picture of like everyone who works day to day at the club. So not just the players, it was like the staff and the likes of Tony were on it. And it wasn't that many people. And it really struck home to me that, you know, it's only a small group really that we're talking about when we say the club. So
it could be a medium-sized business.
They've made mistakes, there's no doubt about it. What I would say is that they've been quite good at rowing back. Like, they could easily have took us on in some of those things. You look around at some of the mad owners that are about, there's a million and one examples, but, fellas turning up, changing the name of the club, changing the colour of the kit, changing the badge just because they can, just because they're the owners. These haven't done that for me. They, when they have got something wrong, they've rowed back. They haven't gone with the owners and just dug in. I mean, if you think about that awful thing Ian Ayre said that time about be careful what you wish for, and that kind of attitude that he had, like, I'm the club, you're just a fan. I feel that we've moved away from that. I feel we're in a better place, and that for me is a big thing.
That Ian Ayre thing, Jay, it comes slap bang. So we're doing the timeline here before I bring sort of Rob and Andy in. What's dead interesting about the Ian Ayre thing, the be careful what you wish for thing, is he says that in February of 2016. And that is slap bang halfway through this ownership. It's effectively 5 years ago from now. Well, not effectively, it literally is 5 years ago from now. And I think it's really interesting in terms of this sort of wider journey. Ian Ayre's not at the club that much longer. After that point, I think that's interesting as well. Tony's involvement comes about 18 months after that. There's other things that have gone on. You've been both on the semi-inside of this and exist also on the outside of it. For me, this is a group they've had to learn a lot of things quite quickly, but they've learned them, I think, relatively openly and relatively well. Is that fair?
Yeah, I was giving us some bits as we were talking about them here, and kind of, some context to some of this. They are the best owners I've seen at Liverpool in my lifetime. I think we've got to be clear about that. It's really important to acknowledge it, because it, to not would just be, it's not truthful, really. And I think that's sometimes where this ownership conversation gets caught up in. And the same for kind of the conversation of, and it was pitched there by Robbo, well, who is there out there that you want? I don't think there is a perfect model. The model we all might want, or the model I certainly want in my mind, doesn't exist out there. Even supported ownership in Germany is not without its problems, as we've seen, for those who kind of follow wider football politics. But that February 2016 date's quite interesting. I was speaking to a student the other day who was doing a dissertation on kind of the politics around Spirit of Shankly and the organising and the campaign, and that went on. And I think 2016 is a bit of a milestone, because I think up until then they're learning their lessons, but they're learning them very slowly. They're still clearly figuring out supporters. There's still people like Ian Ayre are still clearly being listened to by the ownership. And I suspect internally at Liverpool, staff were telling the ownership, you'll be fine here on these ticket prices, you'll be fine. And they weren't heeding the warnings we were giving them and others. And Ian Ayre's kind of, the way he managed staff, he tried to front it up, got it catastrophically wrong. And I reckon the owners kind of, it accelerated their learning a bit. And I think, if you chart kind of their progress, October 2010 to February 2016, February 2016 to now, I know that coincides with Jurgen Klopp, and that makes a lot of other things easier, success. But that is the period on which I would say the club starts to listen a lot more. They start to engage a lot more with supporter issues. Everyone, for the first time in a long, long time, bar a few bumps in the road, feels like they're pulling in the same direction. Feels like they are all on board with each other, understanding each other a bit better, all in the pursuit of the club being the best it can be, and on and off the pitch. And I do think from February 2016 there's a bit of a change amongst the club, as a consequence of the walkout, as a consequence of the reaction to things like Ian Ayre, as a consequence probably to the kinds of people who were speaking out on stuff like that. It wasn't just fans, it was pundits, it was various people in the media kind of acknowledging this is wrong. Tony's appointment's huge in that. They clearly, acknowledge they've got something wrong there and know that they need someone to help fix it. And I think even amongst kind of mistakes they've made with players and stuff like that, from then on in, they're very focused. There's, who I suspect, although, they're not kind of candid about this, there's probably a bit of a change in which individual at FSG kind of takes a role and a lead on some of this. It's someone's responsibility. It doesn't fall between them. They crack on with it. Because I know on the ticket price stuff, John Henry got involved, but he isn't involved in Liverpool day to day. It's believed to be Mike Gordon takes a greater role nowadays. And I think that's clear now. Liverpool's got a bit more of a laser-like focus on what they want to do. And I think they've learned an awful lot more, actually, in that last kind of 5 years as well. And I think there deserves to be an acknowledgement for that as well. Because I think it's placed the club in a much better kind of position to build on success. I think the real challenge for them, though, I know we'll come on to this, but it's something that's kind of I think a big issue for them that they can't control is circumstances keep changing around them. They probably expect that they can change football, Moneyball, financial fair play. That kind of isn't adhered to, and that kind of doesn't work for them in those first 5 years. They build towards Liverpool being successful. They get that success, and you'd have a COVID pandemic that has now completely changed it, and talk of FFP not changing it. They are things they've got to react to, and I think that'll be a big challenge for them, how they react to them next. What you can't just do, I think what they tried to do in the first couple of years is say, we'll bend this to our will. There's got to be a time when you maybe say, we just can't change that. And that will, certainly prompt some big decisions within FSG about kind of what their direction is and how they articulate that, because I think that'll be pretty key. The summer transfer window will be a good indicator for lots of fans. And they've missed out on opportunities building on that success. It felt very different for us as fans. If we'd have had kind of a quiet year, didn't win the league, didn't win the Champions League, but we were all on Anfield singing about, bring out the champions every week, we'd all feel very different going into the summer. We'd be kind of like, right, we've had a year of fun. Now we'll get back to the business and we'll see where it takes us. Because of the year we've had, we're probably going to be a bit like, right, you need to do all these things because we want that big boss moment again. So I think they're kind of hindered by some of that, and I think that'll be really interesting. So there's probably another phase for their learning now, how they kind of deal with being the elite level club they always wanted to be.
Reactions, Andy, is almost the key part of this, and I think it is. I think it is the thing that has defined them, and they have had to react to different circumstances at different times. There's obviously one huge appointment within all of this that they very much get right, and then manage to build on over a period of time, but how they have reacted, I'll say it again, everyone forgets it in the timeline of things. The Sunderland walkout happens whilst Jurgen Klopp is the manager. How they react to these circumstances is the thing that has defined them so far. But often the circumstances are actually of their own making, and that's where at times you're a bit like, come on, all you've got to do is do your consultation stuff in advance, and you wouldn't necessarily make those sorts of mistakes.
No, so I think the excuse me, the walkout kind of crystallized what was already happening slowly. I think when they effectively dared us, it wasn't a spare of the moment thing. The walkout, it was like, listen, this is going to happen, and the anticipation or the expectation was. We're talking about one specific event here was 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and I remember it was one of the weirdest experiences of my life following Liverpool that particular day, because you're kind of looking around. We'd already made the collective decision that we were going to go.
Yeah.
But you're like, what if there's only, a couple of 100, 1,000? And I'm pretty sure Jay would agree with me that even like Jay, who knew far more about it, there was no real expectation or that it was going to get anywhere near it was. But to the credit, I think things were already moving slowly. I think one criticism of them, and it's still valid now, it's also paradoxically a strength, is that they're a little bit slow to take the temperature sometimes. But what I do like is when they do take action, they do it quietly. They don't make a big song and dance about it. I mean, I know there's been a few public statements on the website with certain things, but they'll take action unilaterally. And I think that leans into, and I don't know, I'm just speculating, in they seem to delegate responsibility now. Now they delegate responsibility really well to people who they trust to run the club in the UK, and only take action when it's absolutely critical. And I think they found the right mix. I mean, let's not forget, it took them, as you said, years to get there. We had the whole thing with, they weren't even at FSG when they come in. They were New England Sports Ventures, so you pitch that against. They come in, they say, I think they take a bit of a punt on the club because of the value of it at the time, and they could kind of see what the value could be. And I think what their expected value was nowhere near what it's actually worth now, considering the figures being talked about with this buyout. And they come from America, and Nixon Gillette in America, and I know we shouldn't be that lazy with the assumptions, but it's easy to make that jump. Oh, look, here's another load of them. But also, people forget, people talk about Manchester City. There was all this rumour of Dubai coming back in, so it was kind of like, you have this existential crisis with Liverpool. I mean, I remember going back to the Tyrrell document where Liverpool fans wanted to be a socialist, a socialist state-run football club, ground zero. So on one end, you've got all this, and you've got people begging for a nation state to own it, and there's no ideal. I mean, I remember one week on a Monday, you'd read someone saying something like, "Oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if the fans run the club?" And then like 2 days later, crying out, "Why aren't we signing Kaka for 50 million quid?" I mean, where are you? But No, it did take them a while, and I think they've got it slowly right. I think that there's a certain point, and it's probably the ticket walkout where they actually decided to put the foot down as well. Like they tried to do it their way. They got rid of Roy Hodgson. Dalglish come back in, and I still don't agree with the way that was handled in the end. They try it with Rodgers, and I think that's their way. I think that's when they thought they could outsmart everyone with the Rodgers experiment, and that ultimately fails. And then the biggest decision they ever made, and I think it shows the quiet resolve and ambition, is going out and getting Jurgen Klopp.
And that's prior to the walkout. So, Rob, on this, the Klopp aspect, and the thing that matters first and foremost to everybody is the success of the football team. That we can talk about the other stuff, and the other stuff is important, but it's the success of the football team. And within that, in this current environment as it is now, and from discussing the ownership, the key thing that people look for is the bankrolling. They've made a few decisions, haven't they, around wage bills, which they've allowed to get exceptionally high versus transfer fees around when they will invest. They've sold wisely at the right time. We're going to get closer and closer to talking about what we all anticipate happening next in a second or two. But for me, the interesting thing is that where early finals become later trophies, and it's whether or not there is still a feeling that had they spent money differently, spent more money, could we be in better shape? Could we be in better shape now, despite the pandemic and the injuries? What is the right answer to that question? What actually were and are reasonable expectations?
That's
a very big question. I'm not going to lie to
you. It is a big question. I mean, I was just thinking about the whole culture of even asking that question, because I grew up with the success of the 80s, and we really didn't give a damn about the ownership. They just weren't a conversation being had. And it was only through being starved of success into the 90s that suddenly it became a red hot issue. I mean, I remember, to be long-winded about it, I remember in the 80s, I used to watch other clubs chant "sack the board" was a thing. Right?
No one sacks the board these days. It's a real shame we've lost it.
No, I know. But even the idea of that being your go-to because you're not happy with what's going on the pitch, which seems so wool, quite frankly, back then. You go, we just don't sing that. That's shite. But all these other no-marks sing that. They're concerned. It almost, do you know what it actually felt like? It almost felt like, you're that stupid that you think if you sack your board, you're going to start winning football matches again. We sort of realized we didn't care about the board. It was the alchemy in the manager's office and on the dressing room. Those were the things that made the football club successful. And then the culture changed out of necessity for us, because the alchemy on the pitch wasn't happening, was it, during the 90s? And so we became this fan group that became very focused. I know I was part of that online momentum, I think, in a way, without overblowing, that became critical of the Moores regime, and then into the Hicks and Gillette thing. And I think we left that sort of like almost traumatized. And the fact that we're having this conversation today is part of that culture, I think, that imbued from that. You rewind, if there were podcasts being built in the 80s, you take that technology, I don't think anyone's bothering to have this conversation. But it exists. And sorry, Neil, I slightly lost the thread of what you asked me. You asked me the success on the pitch.
No, I'm asking you to sort of set up what comes next.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
This idea of
what can we expect to spend?
Well, but both in general, but what have they spent enough? Is the increase in the wage bill at the expense of transfer fees enough? Is them effectively, because the accounts make it pretty clear that they put back in what the club makes. I don't think anyone who's read those accounts in good faith would argue with that. To do so would be irresponsible. Is that enough? Does it need to be more? Does it need to be different? Has it been enough? Before we get on to what comes next, where does the land lie? And I'm going to pass that around everybody.
Yeah, well, I think you're right in saying it's an impossible question, because it's enough if it's enough to make you win. It's that simple, and whilst we were winning up until December this year, what we were spending felt enough. If you've fallen away, then it's not enough. And them listening to that, they'd say, that's not very reasonable. What's been interesting, I'd say, beyond even asking what is the right thing to do, is to say, well, what do we now come accustomed to knowing that FSG will do? And what I think it was clear, in a way, a marker was set out in the way they will spend money in their very first transfer window in that January of 2011. And I remember them pronouncing, effectively, we were happy to sign Andy Carroll for 35 million and Suarez because that's exactly what we got back in from the Torres transfer. And they thereafter said, we'll spend what we generate. And people sort of went, what does that actually mean? And I think we know what that means now. They will spend what they generate. We really haven't seen, so it's a measured caution, I think, is what we will always see from them. There's been no real evidence that they will take a punt on future earnings, really. The only evidence of that has been in terms of a stadium, and that's a very measurable. We'll lend the club 110 million, and we can see a return on that through the turnstiles. But beyond that, it's not. It's nothing more than no. We'll generate we'll spend what we generate. That philosophy has got them somewhere, I have to say, because we won everything. I'm sure we'll come on to discuss this, but is there an abiding question here? Does their philosophy, is it proved to have been a correct one because we've won, or because of a minor miracle that Jurgen Klopp has performed? And that is, if I was in the FSG boardrooms, I would be going, have we been vindicated? I don't know if we have. It's hard to say.
It's hard to say, John. Have they been vindicated? Have they done something a little bit more dramatic than as Rob suggests? I do think that they are committed to spending what's earned, but they're happy, I think, to sort of front load that and do that over a period of time. I've said on previous shows, there's a lot of Liverpool's transfers off the basis of fees balanced over 3 years that will have come to an end either in the summer of 2020 or will do in the summer of 2021. So, there's that sort of cash flow equivalent there, but there's the pandemic. In amongst the way in which Rob's phrased that there, where do you fall on what the answer is? Where are you in that boardroom and having that conversation?
I think if the people in the boardroom are saying yes, I understand Rob's question. Exactly. I understand Rob's question, but I've never met a successful business person who's gone, do you know what? Actually, I've had a lot of luck. They always point to their fantastic decision making, and I think to a degree, I think they're right in terms of. It's not just, find Jurgen Klopp, throw him in there and hope for the best, because Jurgen Klopp was available for any football club. He was out of work, partly because of an unsuccessful period at Dortmund. So Jurgen Klopp wasn't necessarily this golden gun or this guy who was going to automatically come in and lead to glory, because, if that was true, other clubs would have done it. And also, let's not forget, for the first 2 or 3 years of Jurgen Klopp here, we had a lot of snidness and a lot of dickheads now who were putting their heads back down, but we're quite happy to say, oh, he's just this nice guy, he just hugs, and then it's the likes of Mourinho that win all the trophies. Jurgen Klopp got a question just like that in a press conference, which was absolutely wild. I can't believe he didn't deck him, to be honest with you. But he basically said, are you just a nice fella that when it's the other lads who win? And so it's the idea of Jurgen being this sort of serial winner that FSG kind of we're lucky to get, wasn't that? They still went out and backed him, and they still have backed him. And I think what they've also done as well, which I think is smart, and you alluded to it before, Neil, is that they've invested in and backed the lads who've been successful for them. So what they could have done, for example, is to have a year or two of Mo Salah and say, well, you want a deal now. You had a deal agreed with your agents. Suck it up. And if you want to moan, then someone's got to pay £150 million for you, and then we'll go again, and then we'll get the next Mo Salah. What they have done, I think is wise, is that they've realised when they have got lucky, and with the likes of Salah, for example, who no one would even sit in a boardroom and say, I knew exactly how successful he was going to be. So what they have done is gone, wow, I'll tell you what, we thought he was good, but we've really backed the winner here. Let's give him all the money we can. And they've done that with Sadio Mane as well. And they've improved contracts proactively and quickly, perhaps learning from past mistakes and stuff like that, and things like Raheem Sterling, who you kind of, as you say, you said before, Neil, with timelines, you forget sort of how long this is, you know what I mean? And that was one where they weren't proactive enough on, and we sort of lost out as a benefit. So I think that as a policy, rather than keep them on these contracts that are fairly low for as long as we can, or sell them when, they've had a great season and we'll buy free form, or, it's the Tottenham one, Daniel Levy, isn't it? Or we've sold Elvis Presley and bought the Beatles. Well, sometimes the Beatles turn out to be crap. And I think FSG learned that quickly and have realised that. And I think that is maybe the smartest thing they've done. The Beatles aren't crap, by the way. Fucking hell, don't come at me for that. We're going to have enough trouble on this pod.
Yeah. John, sometimes the Beatles turn out to be the new Seekers. That was the line.
Exactly. There we are.
Just on, I tell you, one for the teenagers that people say. There is, Gareth, within this, they have made that policy decision, but that has ramifications, because then there is the feeling from a lot of people within the support that the investment isn't there. Because the one thing you can see, it takes a lot. It doesn't take a lot, but it takes enough to troll through a wage bill. People literally don't believe wage bills. As I've discovered recently, no one believes anyone's actual stated wage bill, no matter how rationally you try to sort of frame this. People presume that Manchester City, for reasons that I don't entirely understand, are paying 3 times market rate, not 1.2 times market rate, because that still means they pay more than anybody else. But everyone is sceptical around wage bills. The one thing you can't be sceptical around is transfer fees, and this is something that I still feel as though it has been and is really, really difficult. You understand a new transfer, the idea that Liverpool are the biggest wage spenders in conjunction with City and with United is difficult for people, but you understand buying 3 lads for 80 million.
Yeah, people aren't into the wages argument, are they? I mean, I can say that the wages have gone up 87% in 3 years. And people will probably listen to it and go, so what? But it's not so what. It's a massive deal. I remember them talking about wages when they came in, and they essentially said, it's madness what Liverpool have been doing. It's mad. The wage structure is mad. You had people coming in on big deals and us not getting a lot out of them. And they turned it round and made it more based on success and merit. And, the reason that wage bill has gone up what it's gone up is because they're rewarding the success and they're rewarding the lads who achieved the success. And for me personally, I think that's the right way round. But yeah, I mean, there's a reason that, there's a website that basically specialises in net spend, because, that's a thing that so many people love and want to point to and say, well, look at all these clubs that are above Liverpool in terms of net spend. I've got to be honest, I don't get it, because you mentioned it before, and I remember you mentioned Well Read before as well, and I remember running articles and writing them myself, saying, when we were in financial peril under Hicks and Gillette, I was saying all I want and all a lot of us want is for us to be run within our means, for us to be the club we can be based on what we bring in. Now, when they come in, Liverpool are making 50 million loss, I think, around that time. That's been turned on its head. Revenues have been improved. We've got good players. We've got a good team. And you can always say, look, the answer is go out and buy more players. And we've had that this season, all this season. Like everyone wants 7 centre-halves who are among the best in the world, just available there in case 6 get injured. I personally don't think that's realistic. But, I just think what gets lost in the conversation sometimes for me as well is the unfair game that we're fighting here. Like, they came in thinking that financial fair play had teeth and was going to do something to the likes of City. And City have just laughed at it. And City have won their case, and City are carrying on doing what they're doing. So whoever is the owner of Liverpool Football Club, City are going to be a pain in the arse for them. City are a problem for them. Chelsea are. Man United are. When you look across Europe, it's kind of unfortunate that we're in the same league as all these lads, because, if you threw Liverpool into another league where it wasn't loads of clubs who were so financially able, then probably we'd win more things. So I don't think there's very much realism about that. Like, the Man City story seems to have stopped. It's just like, oh yeah, they won their case and everything's sound now. And no, what is going on there? Why did they win that case? What happens next? What's going on with FFP? Is it just a race to whoever's got the richest owner now? Is that all football's about? People don't like those conversations, and it seems to just want to, rage at the clouds about. But
then, Gareth, does it become then? Do we need to have the richest owner? Because that's what people. That's so. It's, to pull back to that conversation from years gone by. So that then becomes a thing.
Yeah, and so on that basis, and you mentioned that the likely 10% of the ownership group changing, or this new organisation coming in. that being the case, you know, it looks like Liverpool will be valued at round about £2 billion, from what I've read.
Yeah.
So who's got £2 billion to come and buy Liverpool then? And then who's got £2 billion to come and buy Liverpool and spend in this carefree way that so many people seem to want? Like, you know, you could probably count them on one hand. I think about last time when we were where we were, you know, when the club was on its arse and it was in a perilous situation, and it was basically available on the cheap. So it was available on the cheap, and anyone anywhere could come in and have a pop up buying it. And loads of people did try, and it turned out they weren't the best people, or they didn't actually have the money, or, you know what I mean? There was some questionable people that came knocking, and then we ended up with FSG. And I'm sort of all right with it. And, like, you know, people can give me shit all they want and blah, blah, blah. I just think that there's too many people who just, you know, got this tunnel vision about the completely wrong, the bad guys, but they don't tell me what the solution is. What's the solution? Who is kicking around with £2 billion ready to come in and spend in the way you want and be top of the net spend league? I'm all right with this, and if it makes me a fucking top red as well, that really needs to fuck off, that phrase. That is the worst thing I've ever. These top reds who are just happy with, like, winning the league and that. Yeah, mate, because I waited 3 decades to see that, so I am happy about it. So about that.
Andy, on the RedBird thing, before we do begin to look forward, look at what's coming next and ask a couple of those questions, I just want to touch on, for me, what's interesting with it is how much of their stuff appears to be around rights, how much of it appears to be around rights around players, image stuff around players, rights around ownership of television stuff, the fact that they're coming in from, you know, a number of different acquisitions within there. To me, that suggests that they view there's an issue with American sports where American sports work in America. First and foremost, and I'm not being rude about baseball. I'm sure those of you who love baseball, you're all a great crew. So, you know, much love to the baseball community, but fundamentally, your sport's tin pot and only Americans care about it. So if we move forward there, if there is a desire to want to be involved in the way in which global sports work, football is the most important one, and that appears to be this RedBird sort of stated mission. And within that, we've seen, for instance, what the combination of Mo Salah and Liverpool did for Mo Salah's profile. I do sort of view that that's part of what a company like RedBird is investing in. But to do that, Liverpool need to be at the top of the league, in the Champions League for as long as possible. That's how all this works.
Well, maybe Fenway think that this is the answer to the FFP question with Manchester City, is to supercharge it, and maybe they're thinking this is the new frontier for revenue by using companies and getting involved with RedBird, and you get your rights issues and all that kind of thing. We just don't know. I mean, what we do know is that generally they get these kind of decisions right, and we're assuming that this deal's going to happen. What I would say about RedBird, the fact that they think they can get XFL off the ground shows they've got balls. Let's be honest.
Yeah, and also tin pot, fair play to them.
Well, just the amount of people who've tried to get stuff like that off the ground and not being able to do it successfully. One thing as well, what I was going to say, and it kind of it encompasses your question, is, and I think Liverpool have done this, but I think this is a lot down to Tony Barrett, is that you have this Puritanism within Liverpool fans, and it's kind of, there's an hypocrisy in it where there's this ideological, well, we want to do things the right way. You know, we don't want to charge X amounts. We want things done in a certain, the whole Liverpool way thing, which people talk about less and less, by the way. What is the you want? But I think that's a path that you've got to tread carefully. And I think one thing that the owners have done is do that. And whether that's to listen to the right people or learning lessons like stuff for reference there, and sure, maybe that's it. But I'm fascinated as to what this new investment will bring in and what kind of involvement they'll have in the club, because it very much doesn't sound like they're buying 10% and that's just it. It's a financial transaction. It's almost it does seem like there's a transference of skills within that and a knowledge base that they're looking to increase revenue, as I said, possibly to try and supercharge it in response to trying to get involved in an arms race with the likes of PSG, Manchester City and Manchester United.
Okay, we'll come back and talk about the future as we foresee it in a minute or two. But Liverpool today were strongly linked with Ibrahima Konate at Leipzig from The Athletic. John Gibbons had a chat about him.
Statement of intent is, if it happens, the perfect way of describing it. One, because we've seen what Liverpool have been through over the last season, this current campaign, and a lot of questions have understandably been asked of a recruitment operation that's been lauded by me and many others, and it was tougher in January. We don't know exactly what went on behind the scenes, but we were reporting throughout, even after the injuries to Van Dijk and Gomez, that Liverpool as a club intended to get through with what they had, if they could, unless things got drastically worse. Well, they did, and so right at the end of the window, they had to put a pretty rapid plan in place and bring through Kabak and Davies. Kabak has played all of the last 7 games, 90 minutes in each, and he's done fairly well. He's also impressed for Turkey, who are going to the Euros and could well be going to the World Cup by the looks of it too. Davies hasn't played at all, and I don't think either of those would have been coming in if it wasn't for such a critical situation. Then we bring it back to this summer, and hopefully you would think from Liverpool's perspective, normal service would be resumed. They are absolutely respected throughout football for their transfer operations. And a lot of the reaction, if this comes to fruition, so far on social media and in the comment section under the Athletic piece has been, well, have Liverpool done it again? And by that, they mean it in a very complimentary way, which is business done efficiently, early, a player of a great age, physical and technical profile, 21 years old, 6'4", plays the ball out from the back, a commanding, towering, imposing presence. Some in Germany have compared him to a younger Virgil van Dijk. There are some drawbacks in his game that Tom Warville on The Athletic has gone into depth, the pros and cons, in a really good analysis piece that does cover the injury situation that so many people have been talking about. But I think the word would be shrewd if this comes to fruition. Getting in there quickly, beating the opposition to the punch. If it gets done early doors, which is the position we're in now, and we think it's at an advanced stage, although nothing is guaranteed, then you could have a situation where you get a centre-back in who has the potential to be a starting centre-back at Liverpool for the next decade, given his age profile.
Welcome back. After that, listen, loads of Konate stuff. I've done a stat show on him, all sorts of bits and pieces on the Anfield Wrap, and consistently looking ahead to transfers, looking ahead to the way in which this season's going to march on. Arsenal and then Real Madrid's home and away on the horizon. It is a time to suck what remains of this season out with us at the Anfield Wrap. So theanfieldwrap.com/subscribe or download the app for all of that sort of stuff. We're really excited and looking forward to it. And then a big summer, I think, where things will be a little different to the last couple for the Reds. All of that is to come. In order to begin the process of looking ahead, Jay, one thing that I think does need to be referenced, and which has come up in amongst these sorts of conversations, is Liverpool's relationship with partners. I mentioned RedBird just before there, and Andy mentioned this idea of supercharging different aspects of it. Billy Hogan has taken the place of Peter Moore now as CEO. One of the things that Peter Moore does whilst as CEO is he uses the Jurgen Klopp space, and he uses the Liverpool fan base in a way which I think he's, worthy of a fair bit of credit about. They try to live the value of this means more, and they bring that idea of Liverpool as a local and simultaneously global place along with them. One of the things that makes those partnerships that they've got now, for instance, the one with Nike, more valuable is that feeling of everybody pulling in the right direction, as has been discussed, that you can effectively market that. But you can only market that on all of this. My thing on this is you can only really market everyone pulling in the same direction if that direction is moving forward and towards winning things. And that's why the more I think about this, the more I wonder about where things align. For a lot of this to work, for this investment to work with RedBird, for all the bits and pieces of where the money works, Liverpool need to keep pulling in that direction. If not, it could actually fail quite badly.
Yeah, Liverpool have created a really good ecosystem that will give them success. The problem is it's very, very delicate and it's very fragile. For all the reasons we've set out, us, them, external influences, it's not as straightforward. On the bit about Peter Moore there and kind of working, with partners and, how you use them, get the most value financially and otherwise. I think they've done that very well. And, I would give lots of credit, again, as Robbo said before, to people like Tony, because I know, we were having conversations with him an awful lot. I'd imagine lots of other people were to say, you don't need Nike to come in and get LeBron James to wear a shirt. You need Nike to come in and get local kids to wear the shirt and sell that kind of all of us get
or
something
both,
out of
Jay.
this. Or both, yeah, do both. But the bit that's been missing at Liverpool for so long was the feeling, well, what do we get out of it as fans? We want this success. We're playing an active part. We've played an active part in the kind of ownership struggles. You know, that voice Rob mentioned before, you know, didn't go away. All that internet kind of noise around Hicks and Gillette didn't go away. Fans have a voice and they need an outlet for it. You can use that to your advantage, and I think they've done that. The problem will come, and you know, it was touched on about transfer fees. All of these numbers being bandied around, you can't talk about these numbers and not let people see something physical for it. Because I don't think, you know, Robbo said it before, people don't see wages, but they see transfers. People see the house someone buys, but they don't see how much that person's earning or how hard that person's working to buy that house.
Or even the interior investment that they've done on the decorations.
Yeah, they see, the wallpaper like yours, Neil. They don't see the physical investments often in some of this. And I think it's really difficult for them now moving forward on this, because you talk about RedBird. Well, what does that mean? And fans will say this, what does that mean for us? And when they mean for us, they might think about ticket prices, they might think about the future of the club, but they will be thinking, what does that mean for signing players? And I think this will be the question. I think RedBird's a bit of a long-term bet for them. And I think it's the way to try and keep up with that arms race. We're not going to win the arms race against FSG, against, you know, PSG or Man City. We're behind the curve on Man United, but catching them all the time on what they've done. We've played catch up in the last few years. The stuff we've done with contracts, the club's had to come a long way to improve some of that. But RedBird feels like a long-term bet. And if it comes off, great. And you might be some, you know, you will grow along the way with it. But it does feel to me like it's still a delicate ecosystem. This is the next way of trying to build on, you know, sell the club for what it's worth, you know, get the most money you can to create the most success. But you've got to do just a little bit more, I think, in the short term. And for me, that's trying to realise some of the value now, because your danger of you know, betting the house on what money you can get in the future of RedBird is, in the meantime, Man City are going to go and spend loads of money, and other clubs are going to restructure, like Barcelona. Real Madrid aren't going to have another couple of seasons like they've had. More of them are going to spend money, and you can't stand still in football. And there's a bit of me that thinks, is there an opportunity in this kind of RedBird acquisition, the value of the club being as high as it supposedly is, that you find a way to release some of that equity in the same way that, you know, Abramovich over the years has, you know, loaned the club loads of money and gets around FFP by suddenly making it shares in the club. Is there something in that just buys you some breathing space? Because I think it's a good ecosystem that Liverpool have built. I think it's the best thing we could have in terms of our values as a club. It fits. I don't want kind of, you know, state-backed owners. I do think, though, it is really dangerous. And I do think, as you say, Neil, it could be catastrophic, because if in the summer you sign one or two players, play with it relatively within your means as where you are now. I want us to be within our means, but I think, you know, mentioning that as a thing, 10 years ago under Moores, 12, 13 years ago under Moores, it was kind of, you know, we'll spend what we've got and plus the Champions League money, and people just think, well, hang on, there's all this money we're hearing, these new TV deals, and you get more money than ever for the Champions League. And we've only really signed Virgil van Dijk and Alisson. They're not seeing kind of the other bits of transfers, because the clubs had to come a long way, making up for wages, as I say. It becomes fragile if people start asking questions, and if then success doesn't follow. So it does feel like they just need to put a bit in early, a bit of cash in early, go big on transfers, just to actually cement your success as well, to make this even more likely, but give yourself a bit of breathing space, because it does, it could go the other way.
On John, before I'll bring everyone in. I want to end this with two key questions for everyone. Everyone get the chance to answer them. Through the next decade, you know, our FSG and LFC supporters' aims sufficiently aligned, and our FSG equipped and prepared to look after Liverpool Football Club in a post-COVID world. I'm going to ask that. The other thing on the partnerships, which is something that in a lot of sort of coverage and chat I think gets missed, is this is where Liverpool's mismanagement over a period of time of the women's team is a problem. You know, if there's going to be women's matches on the BBC, on BBC One and BBC Two, partners like Nike will want them to have been front and centre. If we are having this chat from a business point of view, I know we've done the other aspects of the questions around the women's team across last week in Weekender, But there isn't there? There's an issue now for the club where, because they haven't invested in that, spent the time in that, shown the care. And when I say invested, I mean time as much as money. They are now playing a bit of catch up there. They've created that situation for themselves because Standard Chartered and Nike would want to be associated with a successful women's product.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think, look, there'll be people listening to this with varying degrees of interest in the women's team, from none to very invested. And that's always the way it will be. But as you rightly say, one group of people who are very interested in women's sport are Nike because, they're selling a lot of products to women. 50%, I wouldn't be surprised. And so they'll be looking at this. And I do gather as well, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, I do gather that when Nike sort of came involved and had a look at the state of our women's team, there was raised eyebrows, to say the least, and it was sort of commented on, and so it's the kind of thing where they have needed to get the house in order, and they've recognised, I guess, that they need to get the house in order, but it's something that will take time. But the idea of there's only a few hundred who goes and see it, so it doesn't matter. As you say, Neil, just doesn't wash in terms of the grander scheme of where the partners want us to be and where the club should be positioning itself from a source of pride as much as anything, really. Like, it's a bit embarrassing that the women's team, to me, is sort of languishing in the second tier and are not going to come up this year. And so, from that point of view, really, they own the whole football club, and they need to take all of that seriously, really. And I think, as you say, Neil, from a partner's point of view, they'll expect that, especially with the go for the women's game. Liverpool needs to be sort of front and centre of that, and hopefully that's what they've learned, and hopefully it's another lesson to them of when you can take your eye off the ball on certain things, which isn't just this. FSG have done, with the idea of, I can just leave that for a bit. It doesn't work like that. You get left behind.
All right, then. So, Rob, throughout the next decade, we've talked about what's brought us here with a lot of really good contributions. But from your point of view, throughout the next decade, do you think that Fenway Sports Group and Liverpool supporters' aims are sufficiently aligned? Do you think that Fenway are equipped and prepared to be able to look after Liverpool Football Club in a post-COVID world?
I think they're arguably, intellectually, mentally, we can use the word morally, as well equipped as any set of owners you could see out there to do that.
Really?
Believe me, the bar's not very high. Because notwithstanding those who just don't have to even think because they have money. That's what
I mean. So because FFP is up in the air. I'm not saying it's going to go one way or the other, but FFP is up in the air. There's no money in the transfer market. Cash flow is a massive problem in a number of different places. So that's why I said, really.
It doesn't mean, I would caveat everything I just said with that doesn't mean that'll be good enough for what we want, which is ongoing success. Or I'm just talking about it in the sense of how Gareth in particular, I think, talks very well about how what do you want from your ownership, apart from bottomless pockets. Now, if once you park that, and that's why I use the word morally, because there are often compromises that come with that. Once you park that, you have to say they are an able set of managers. The FSG group. They are an able set of people who seem smart enough and understand what needs to be done. The challenge they could have, though, is realizing that how far are they just going to trade on their wits before they realize they have to do something bolder financially. I think, arguably, looking back on it, the decision of bringing Jurgen Klopp in, which they would rightly take all the credit for, they have to acknowledge that it is fortuitous the degree to which he's successful and to the degree to which that enabled them for their model to be sustainable. And it took a while, and it was only when he comes in that everything they tried came into being. And I take Jay's point about 2016 as a turning point, but he's the key factor in that turning point. I do look at the investment coming in. The mantra they've always, I said at the start of my last contribution was that we will spend what we bring in. There's a disingenuousness in that statement, though, to a degree, because what they have brought in is they've increased the value of the club, but that hasn't been spent yet because they've taken it from being worth 300 million to a couple of billion. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can remortgage against that. with interest rates being at a historical low level, that wouldn't actually be the worst thing to do, is to take on some debt at this time. Or you could do what they have done, which is take on an equity contribution. I don't know the exact numbers of it. Is it 10% for 200 million roughly? Whatever
of the club part of Fenway, that's the guess. But
okay, all right.
But the RedBird thing is in all of Fenway, so it comes to 700 million from 7 billion.
Okay. But it's a crystallization of sorts of the increase in value. I think as supporters, we're entitled to say, more specifically than what's in it for us, is literally that is akin to revenue that this football club has brought in by being successful, albeit you've been massive contributors to that, but so have we all. And we've seen this pandemic, by the way, that the supporters, really does count for an enormous amount, and more than just the revenue over the gates. You can see its value for the first time in the history of the sport. You can see its value. It's so tangible.
Yeah.
So we are entitled to say how much of that money that you're crystallizing, that profit that you're crystallizing, is going to go back into the thing that we have contributed towards. We would like to see a number put on that, please.
Okay. Gareth, throughout the next decade, Fenway Sports Group and Liverpool supporters aim sufficiently aligned, are Fenway equipped and prepared to look after Liverpool in a post-COVID world?
Well, I think they will be, because as we talked about before, the price that's on the club, and it's not hard to figure out what that is. I don't see anyone piling in post-COVID and looking to buy it, to be honest. You've got to have a certain will about you to want to get even involved in football. It's not the best way to spin. People talk about the club being spun. It's been over 10 years for this spin to happen. It's not, they could have easily made the money 10 times over doing something else, I'm sure. I've just got to say, by the way, that very disparaging what you said before to the oldest baseball club in the UK, which is Liverpool Trojans, by the way. Them boys are going to be absolutely fuming when they hear that.
Sorry, the lads.
I only know about that from me wonderful Crosby Harold days. But yeah, we sort of are where we are with them, aren't we? And there are loads of factors which I think have come up in this podcast. So, where does FFP go? Because otherwise, if it continues to have no teeth or even less teeth or just get binned, which has been talk of, then, the richest clubs are going to disappear into the distance. And what can Liverpool do to, the club have done well, to get revenues up, to put the club back on the map, all of that kind of stuff. We give loads of credit to Jurgen Klopp, and absolutely we should do. And there is the thing, and I've seen it as well, where people say they just got lucky. But, they recruited Jurgen Klopp, they went after Jurgen Klopp, they persuaded Jurgen Klopp to take this job when he didn't want to go to Man United, didn't want to go to Spurs, and I think even Arsenal and City had a sniff as well. So credit is deserved for them selling a vision that he was bought into, and he stayed here, and he signed new contracts, and he doesn't want to go away again, and he's not politicised, and he's not putting stuff out there. Perhaps the first time where there's been any hint of that for me was the transfer window just gone, in that you did get the sense that he would have liked a centre-half at the start of the window and not the end of it. I think the criticism around that was probably fair enough. But now what did he go and do from here on in? Did he learn from that mistake? We say they learn from the mistakes. Well, they need to go and do something in the transfer market. And it looks like they are, because you just literally put an insert into this podcast about it. And what will they do? What will they do if we don't get into the Champions League? It's looking likely that will be the case. That's what the odds suggest. It's been put out there, hasn't it? Via journalists you can trust, so it's come from somewhere. Them saying this will not affect anything. We will still spend if Liverpool are not in the Champions League, all of that kind of stuff. Well, they're going to have to do that then, because if they don't, I think people will start to sharpen the pitchforks. Because as I said, right near the start, I think the way the standards we hold them to, the scrutiny that we put their way, has gone up tenfold because of Hicks and Gillette. And as Rob said before, I can remember those times as well. We didn't talk about owners. We didn't give a shit about owners. We might say the odd thing like, the ground should be bigger or we should spend more money. But there wasn't this constant conversation about it. There wasn't, we didn't turn our eyes to, it's going wrong, it's the owner's fault. It's going wrong, get different owners. And that is the conversation now. And so they are held to different standards. So, and they know that. They know that. That's why, Barrett's been mentioned a few times. That's why they've got him in. He's the sort of the conduit between the two. It's up to Barrett to see it coming before it even arrives. So I think they've got some clever people at the club, starting with the manager, through the likes of Edwards now, who we've got to give credit, the coaching staff, some of the people behind the scenes, even some of the lads and girls who are running the community side of things. So there's lots of positive stuff in place, but the argument will always come back to the cold hard cash and who they can go out and get, and whether they can spot talent early and all of the stuff that they said when they first arrived. So we shall see, is all I would say. I've no way of crystal balling it. I don't know. But what I would say is I don't see anyone coming in. I don't see a change of ownership anytime soon. I think we'll see an Annie Road. We've got an Annie Road to come. We've got spending to come. And as you've highlighted for a long time as well, Neil, it's an aging first team now. So they're gonna have to do something about that as well.
So, Andy, do you feel as though those aims across the next decade between Fenway and Liverpool are going to be sufficiently aligned? Do you think that they've got the ability to do a lot of, as Gareth just talked about there, there's a lot on that to-do list still. I'm sure at times they must feel a bit like, how can there be even more on the to-do list? We've done all these things, but that to-do list still exists. It still grows. It's part of running this football club. Do you think they've got the appetite for it still?
I think they've got the appetite, but I don't think you can guarantee anything because there's just too many variables outside the Liverpool's control. All you can do is best prepare and be better and position yourself in the best way. So, kind of the behaviour while they've been at the club, stuff like improving infrastructure, building Kirby, stuff like that. It's in the medium long term. So you got to think that they're looking at stuff like that, and a lot of it as well. I think strategically, if FFP isn't going to go away, I'm also assuming that the Gulf interest in PSG and Man City, that interest from these Gulf states is going to remain. They may just disappear into the ether or lose interest or whatever. But assuming the worst case scenario, you look at the work that Liverpool are doing with the likes of forming alliances with Leipzig, and just kind of putting the groundwork into to strengthen the foundations even more. If you ask me, have they got the best interest at heart? I'd say, yeah, I think so, for their own benefit as much as ours, because they've got to. Because if they're not successful, then the value with the assets, and people talk about Liverpool being valued at $2 billion, that falls. It wouldn't surprise me if you see, and I think that it's already starting to happen. The situation with Barcelona and Real Madrid, kind of with them being in the mire, kind of may encourage this. The clubs that aren't Gulf owned forming closer bonds to try and influence stuff with UEFA off the pitch to try and negate this FFP thing that could come in. So I'm probably more, I'm not saying happy because I'm never happy with anything ever, but I'm probably more satisfied with the ownership group at this point in time than at any point beforehand. And that's notwithstanding the absolute mess of this season, which I think no one could have possibly seen coming over the hill. So to answer your question shortly, yeah, but there are so many variables. I think it's impossible to guarantee.
There are loads of variables. My little bit on this is the thing to keep your eye out for is on media and media rights. I think that will become really defining, not just for Fenway Sports Group within the context of RedBird, but I think in general. I think the idea of the way in which clubs can and when they can control their own media and what that actually means in a constructive sense, I think will become really important for the European giants, and that is most definitely worth keeping an eye on. In a number of different ways. Jay, what is your position on FSG at this point? Do you feel as though everyone's aims are sufficiently aligned? Are they equipped and prepared to do what needs to be done next? Or do you think that this could be another thing where in 2 years' time we're maybe saying to one another, well, he learned the lesson in the end?
No, I think our interests align. And I think if you go off their track record with the Red Sox, they bring them some success. It's not unparalleled, sustained success, the best ever, kind of Barcelona period, the dominance kind of thing in that tin pot sport you call baseball, Neil. But you won't get that in football anymore. I just don't think it'll allow. I think there's too many people at that level or in or around that space that will, find a way to short circuit it as Liverpool maybe did a bit quicker, or will find a way, to just outspend the others. I think they'll come back. It's harder to do that. So I think their interest is in Liverpool to continue to be successful so that the value of it continues to grow, so that the club itself as an asset on their portfolio rises, so that more RedBird investments come, that value grows. they, their success is built on their portfolio performing well. So they need Liverpool to be good and continue to be good, and you can't stand still in football. And I think they recognise that now. I think they're well placed. I agree with kind of the comments made that Rob said around, if in a post-COVID world, how you imagine the world to go, everyone maybe having to think differently about what they spend money on, how they spend money on marketing, kind of all that kind of stuff. In an ordinary world, I think they are well placed. They're smart. The people they've got around them to make these decisions. They've got the fan base to build on, the team, but they do face a set of unfortunate circumstances. I think if Liverpool kind of have that big parade after winning a league after so long, they play this season in a kind of normal world, not a COVID world, they kind of, sell the club even more. Its value grows significantly. Players want to come and play in that. It's much easier, I think, for them than what the unfortunate set of circumstances they have now, coupled with an aging squad. I think they're well placed. It's just now a question of kind of managing some storms that will come their way, and that might be that they have a player that wants to go in the summer, for example, one of the front three, or they decide it's the time to cash in on one of those front three, as an example. What you do next is huge, and it can't just be, say it was Mane, it couldn't just be, we've got 100 million for Mane and we're now going to buy 250 million players. It's Kanate and someone else. We can't do that. I think you've got to do a bit more. And I do think there is something in that RedBird stuff. I think to help them on this, and this is not just because it's been a sore point, something I've talked about for a while, is I do think they've got to be better at explaining some of this and find a way to talk about it to fans, about their future vision, how they build on the success. That isn't Jurgen Klopp and isn't just going to well-placed journalists. I think there's a huge value, and they haven't done it enough in going to well-placed journalists to talk about what they do. But Billy, I'll use Billy as an example because I think Billy stepped up on this, and I think he's good. But Billy Hogan, kind of was behind the email that came out about what they're doing on season tickets lately. He wants to own that. He doesn't think staff at the club should take the criticism for that. That's good. But then Jurgen Klopp shouldn't be answering questions about players alone in press conferences. I think you place a huge weight on him. He might want some of that, but there needs to be another level of leadership to articulate what we do next. And I think that's as important than what they do. Because in this space between now and the summer,
and beyond,
but certainly in the run into the summer, depending on what happens in the Champions League, depending on what happens in the league, there's going to be lots of questions around Liverpool, and Jurgen Klopp shouldn't be answering them in press conferences. So I think it's how they see themselves now. This will be really indicative, I think, of how good they can rise to this challenge that they're going to face. Other clubs are going to come. Man City are going to keep spending. They're not going to lose interest, I don't think. Man United are going to come again. They've kind of sustained a relative level of financial performance. They're going to be back in the Champions League. Chelsea, new manager, kind of, he's going to keep them relatively stable. It's going to be hard now. Liverpool find themselves where they thought they were kind of in the top, of the mini top six league. They now find themselves, they might just be outside of it. How they cement themselves, there's lots of big questions, and I do think they are well placed. I think they just need to kind of find a way to realise some of this financial stuff. The RedBird thing, as you say there, if Liverpool look like they're going to spend a bit of that money on players, on investing, you could use that money to do the Anfield Road, but you should use that money and that'd be the smart thing to do. But the necessary thing to do will be to spend some of that on players. If you have a capital investment, you need to spend some of that on players. So that, right or wrong, it just removes the kind of questions you're going to get from fans, because that is an important bit in this. This is the bit we just don't know. How we think and feel is going to shift significantly. If Liverpool go past Real Madrid, get Porto in the semi-finals, and they've got a Champions League final on the horizon, everyone will feel very different than if we get our backsides handed to us by Real Madrid and we don't kind of have a chance of a run into, that lets us see finishing the top four. This will shift very quickly, and I think they're aware of that. They just could face this kind of big challenge in a post-COVID world much quicker than they might like to imagine.
Just dead quick, Jay, before I go to John to sum us all up. Who's your favourite baseballer? Which one do you think the best one of the baseballers?
Babe Ruth.
Wasn't there a fella called A-Rod or something like that? I think he got clutched, didn't he?
A-Rod. I don't know. I was just asking you which one's your favourite one. Anyway, John.
I haven't really got many favourite rounders players.
John, what is your what is your outlook on the idea of the aims being sufficiently aligned, and whether or not FSG are equipped and prepared to look after Liverpool Football Club in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because while the others were speaking, I was thinking, well, they're probably having similar conversations now amongst themselves. Like, I mean, they're not recording it because, as Jay says, none of them will speak. But they'll be having these, chats and certainly not to us, Neil. But they'll have these chats amongst themselves on.
Talk to Chelsea on Merseyside. Go on, John.
Having these chats amongst themselves on. Have we taken this project as far as we can, and and looking at what's going on now, obviously with the COVID, but also the relaxation of FFP, they'll be having these chats. Do you know what I mean? Because they, as I say, they came to win and they came to enjoy it. And if they don't feel like they can do both, then I think they probably would just say, well, let's look into sort of selling this now, cashing in, making the money, because they'll be our business people, and they are, at the end of the day, this was an investment. But like the others said before, they could have invested anything, and they chose to invest heavily in sports. And I think it's because they enjoy it and they want to win. They love the success, and I think they do enjoy it much more than what people think. And they're very ingrained within the football club now. It's 10 years of their lives, and so Mike Gordon, you see, he obviously doesn't speak too much and stuff, but you see him and how involved he is, not just with the club but also the charities. And I know he's supported a lot of the charities connected to the football club, and how much they sort of appreciate it, and how much he's got that stuff, the football club more involved in those. Someone like Linda is on the board at the foundation now, and people who I speak to at the foundation say she's signing stuff off and things like that. She's involved in projects, she enjoys it, and she's got a clear idea of what sort of the foundation should be doing on a global scale, really. And so it's not just this thing that's bringing them in a few quid every month and they're a silent partner. Do you know what I mean? They're like, oh yeah, there's the Liverpool checkers, right? The boys must have won again. Do you know what I mean? It is much more than that. And so I think they'll try and find a way, is guess of what I'm saying. I think they'll try and find a way to stay the owners, because they're enjoying it and they want a success. And as you say in the question, Neil, are sort of are kind of wants and needs align in that. But I think at the same time, I think if they didn't feel they could do it anymore, they'd just go and do something else.
Okay, thank you very, very much indeed to everyone for taking the time on this one. To Rob Gutmann, to Andy Heaton, to Jay McKenna, to Gareth Roberts, and to John Gibbons. And thanks a lot as well for the bit on Canate in the middle. Do subscribe to the Anfield Wrap if you have been thinking of doing so. It would be great to get you on board. And just to sort of sum up, any negative criticism you've got for this show, at Rob Gutmann, that's ROBGUTMANN. That's where we want all of that to go. It has been the Anfield Wrap on Fenway Sports Group. See you later.